Essays on a Science of Mythology, Chapter 4, The Psychological Aspects of the Quarry, by Jung. Not only is the figure of Demeter and the Quarry in its threefold aspect as Maiden, Mother, and Hecate not unknown to the psychology of the unconscious, it is even something of a practical problem. The Quarry has her psychological counterpart in those archetypes which I call the self or supraordinate personality on the one hand and the anima on the other. In order to explain these figures, with which I cannot assume all readers to be familiar, I must begin with some remarks of a general nature. The psychologist has to contend with the same difficulties as the mythologist when an exact definition or clear and concise information is demanded of her. The picture is concrete, clear, and subject to no misunderstandings only when it is seen in its habitual context. In this form it tells us everything it contains, but as soon as one tries to abstract the real essence of the picture, the whole thing becomes cloudy and indistinct. In order to understand its living function, we must let it remain an organic thing in all its complexity, and not try to examine the anatomy of its corpse in the matter of the scientist, or the archaeology of its ruins in the matter of the historian. Naturally, this is not to deny the justification of such methods when applied in their proper place. In view of the enormous complexity of the psychic phenomena, a purely phenomenological point of view is, and will be for a long time, the only possible one, and the only one with any prospect of success. Whence things come and what they are, these, particularly in the field of psychology, are questions which are apt to call forth untimely attempts at explanation. Such speculations are moreover based far more on unconscious philosophical premise than on the nature of the phenomena themselves. Psychic phenomena occasioned by unconscious processes are so rich and so multifarious that I prefer to describe my findings and observations and, where possible, to classify them, that is, to arrange them under certain definite types. That is the method of natural science, and it is applied wherever we have to do with multifarious and still unrecognized material. One may question the utility or the appropriateness of the categories or types used in the arrangement, but not the correctness of the method itself. Since for years I have been observing and investigating the products of the unconscious in the widest sense of the word, namely dreams, fantasies, visions, and delusions of the insane, I have not been able to avoid recognizing certain regularities, that is, types. There are types of situations and types of figures that repeat themselves frequently and have a corresponding meaning. I therefore employ the term motif to designate these repetitions. Thus there are not only typical dreams, but typical motifs in dreams. These may, as we have said, be situations or figures. Among the latter, there are human figures that can be arranged under a series of archetypes, the chief of them being, according to my suggestion, the shadow, the wise old man, the child, including the child hero, the mother, primordial mother and earth mother, the superordinate personality, daimonic, being superordinate, and her counterpart, the maiden, and lastly, the anima in man and animus in woman. The above types are far more exhausting. All the statistical the above types are far from exhausting all the statistical regularities in this respect. The figure of the Quarry that interests us belongs here, when observed in a man, to the anima type, and when observed in a woman to the type of supraordinate personality. It is an essential characteristic of psychic figures that are duplex and at least capable of duplication. At all events, they are bipolar and oscillate between their positive and negative meanings. Thus, the superordinate personality can appear in a despicable and distorted form, like, for instance, Mephistopheles, who is really more positive as a personality than the vapid and unthinking careerist Faust. Another negative figure is the Tom Thumb or Tom Dumb of the folklores. The figure corresponding to the Quarry in a woman is generally a double one, i.e. a mother and a maiden, which is to say that she appears now as one and now as the other. From this I would conclude for a start that in the formation of the Demeter-Quarry myth, the feminine influence so far outweighs the masculine that the latter are practically of no significance. The man's role in the Demeter myth is really only that of seducer and conqueror. As a matter of practical observation, the Quarry often appears in a woman as an unknown young girl, not infrequently as Gretchen or the unmarried mother. Another frequent modulation is the dancer, who is often formed by borrowing from classical knowledge, in which case the maiden appears as the Corybant, the Maenad, or the nymph. An occasional variant is the Nixie or water spirit, who betrays her superhuman nature by her fishtail. Sometimes the Quarry and mother figures slither down altogether to the animal kingdom, the favorite representatives then being the cat or the snake or the bear or some black monster of the underworld like a crocodile or other salamander-like saurian creatures. The maiden's helplessness exposes her to all sorts of dangers, for instance of being devoured by reptiles or ritually slaughtered like a beast of sacrifice. Often there are bloody, cruel, and even obscene orgies to which the innocent child falls victim. Sometimes it is a true nekia, a descent into Hades and a quest for the treasure hard to attain, occasionally connected with orgasmic sexual rites or offerings of menstrual blood to the moon. Oddly enough, the various tortures and obscenities are carried out by Earth Mother. There are drinkings of blood and bathings of blood, also crucifixions. The maiden who crops up in case histories differs not inconsiderably from the vaguely flower-like Quarry, in that the modern figure is more sharply delineated and not nearly so unconscious, as the following examples will show. The figures corresponding to Demeter and Hecate are superordinate, not to say over life-size mothers, ranging from the Pieta type to the Baobo type. The unconscious, which acts as a counterbalance to woman's conventional innocuousness, proves to be highly inventive in this latter respect. I can recall only a very few cases where Demeter's own noble figure in its pure form breaks through an image rising spontaneously from the unconscious. I remember a case, in fact, where a maiden goddess appears clad all in purest white, but carrying a black monkey in her arms. The Earth Mother is always chthonic, and is occasionally related to the moon, either through the blood sacrifice already mentioned, or through child sacrifice, or else because she is adorned with a sickle moon. Footnote: often the moon is simply there, as for instance in a fantasy of the chthonic mother in the shape of a woman in the bees. Joseph D. Bacon in the Border Country. Quote, the path led to a tiny hut of the same color as the 4 great trees that stood above it. Its door hung wide open, and in the middle of it, on a low stool, there sat an old woman wrapped in a long cloak, looking at her. The hut was filled with the steady humming of bees. In the corner of the hut there was a deep cold spring, in which the white moon and the little stars were reflected. The old woman exhorted the heroine to remember the duties of a woman's life. In Tantric Yoga, an indistinct hum of swarm of love-mad bees proceeds from the slumbering Shanki, the dancer who dissolves into a swarm of bees. Bees are also, as an allegory, connected with Mary, as for the text of the consecration of the Easter candles shows. In pictorial or plastic representations of the mother is dark, deepening to black or red, these being her principal colors, and with a primitive or animal expression of face. In form she not infrequently resembles the Neolithic idea of Venus, of Braspui, or of that of Willendorf, or again the sleeper of Hal Cephaliani. Now and then I have come across multiple breasts arranged like those of a sow. The Earth Mother plays an important part in the woman's unconscious, for all her manifestations are described as powerful. This shows that in such cases the Earth Mother element in the conscious mind is abnormally weak and requires strengthening. In view of all this, it is, I admit, hardly understandable why such figures should be reckoned as belonging to the type of supraordinate personality. In a scientific investigation, however, one has to disregard moral or aesthetic prejudice and let the facts speak for themselves. The maiden is often described as not altogether human in the usual sense. She is either of unknown or peculiar origin, or she looks strange or undergoes strange experiences, from which one is forced to infer the maiden's extraordinary myth-like nature. Equally, and still more strikingly, the Earth Mother is a divine being, in the classical sense. Moreover, she does not by any means always appear in the guise of Baobo, but for instance more like Queen Venus in the Hypneritomanchia Polyphili, though she is invariably heavy with destiny. The often unaesthetic forms of the Earth Mother are in keeping with the prejudice of the modern feminine unconscious. This prejudice was lacking in antiquity. The underworld nature of Hecate, who is closely connected with Demeter and Persephone's fate, both point nevertheless to the dark side of the human psyche, though not to the same exact as in the modern material, though not to the same extent as the modern material. The superordinate personality is the total man, i.e., man as he really is, not as he appears to himself. To this wholeness the unconscious psyche also belongs, which has its requirements and needs just as consciousness has. I do not want to interpret the unconscious personalistically, and assert, for instance, that fantasy images like those described above are the wish fulfillments due to repression. These images were as such never conscious, and consequently could never have been repressed. I understand the unconscious rather as an impersonal psyche common to all people, even though it expresses itself through a personal consciousness. When anyone breathes, their breathing is not a phenomenon to be interpreted personally. The mythological image belongs to the structure of the unconscious and are an impersonal possession. In fact, the great majority of people are far more possessed by them than possessing them. Images like those described above give rise to certain conditions to corresponding disturbances and symptoms, and it is then the task of medical therapy to find out whether and how to what extent these impulses can be integrated into the conscious personality, or whether they are a secondary phenomenon which some defective orientation of consciousness has brought out of its normal potential state into actuality. Both possibilities exist in practice. I usually describe the superordinate personality as the self, little s, thus making a sharp distinction between the ego, which, as is well known, extends only so far as the conscious mind, and the whole of the personality, which includes the unconscious as well as the conscious component. The ego is thus related to the self as a part to whole. To that extent the self is superordinate. Moreover, the self is felt empirically, not as a subject, but as an object, and by this reason of its unconscious component, which can only come to conscious indirectly, by way of projection. Because of its unconscious component, the self is so far removed from the conscious mind that it can only be partially expressed by human figures. The other part of it has to be expressed by objective, abstract symbols. The human figures are father and son, mother and daughter, king and queen, god and goddess. Theriomorphic symbols are the dragon, the snake, elephant, lion, bear, and other powerful animals, or again, the spider, crab, butterfly, bee, worm, etc. Plant symbols are generally flowers, lotus, and rose. These lead on to geometrical figures like the circle, the sphere, the square, the quaternity, the clock, the firmament, and so on. The indefinite extent of the unconscious component makes a comprehensive description of the human personality impossible. Accordingly, the unconscious supplements the picture with living figures, ranging from the animal to the divine, and the two extremes outside people, and rounds out the animal extreme, through the addition of vegetable and inorganic abstractions into a microcosm. These addenda have a high frequency in anthropomorphic divinities, where they appear as attributes. Demeter and Quarry, mother and daughter, extend the feminine consciousness both upwards and downwards. They add an older and younger, stronger and weaker dimension to it, and widen out the narrowly limited conscious mind bound in space and time, giving it intimations of a greater and more comprehensive personality, which has a share in the eternal course of things. We can hardly suppose that myth and mystery were invented by any conscious purpose. It seems much more likely that they were the involuntary revelation of the psychic, but unconscious precondition. The psychic pre-existence to consciousness, i.e., in the child, participates in the maternal psyche on the one hand, while on the other it reaches across to the daughter psyche. We could therefore say that every mother contains her daughter in herself, and every daughter her mother, and that every mother extends backwards into her mother and forwards into her daughter. This participation and intermingling give rise to a peculiar uncertainty as regard time. A woman lives earlier as her mother, later as a daughter. The conscious experience of these ties produces the feeling that her life is spread over generations, the first step towards the immediate experience and conviction of being outside time, which brings with it a feeling of immortality. The individual's life is elevated into type, indeed it becomes the archetype of woman's fate in general. This leads to a restoration or apostatatis of the lives of her ancestors, who now, through the bridge of the momentary individual, pass down into the generations of the future. An experience of this kind gives the individual a place and a meaning in the life of the generations, so that all unnecessary obstacles are cleared out of the way of the life stream that flows through her. At the same time, the individual is rescued from her isolation and restored to wholeness. All ritual preoccupation with archetypes ultimately has this aim and this result. It is immediately clear to the psychologist what cathartic and at the same time rejuvenating effects must flow from the Demeter cult into the feminine psyche, and what a lack of psychic hygiene characterizes our culture, which no longer knows the kind of wholesome experience afforded by Eleusinian emotions. I take full account of the fact that not only the psychologically minded layman, but the professional psychologist and psychiatrist as well, even the psychotherapists, do not possess an adequate knowledge of their patient's archetypal material, insofar as they have not specially investigated the aspect of phenomenology of the unconscious. For it is precisely in the field of psychiatric and psychotherapy observation that we frequently meet with the cases characterized by a rich crop of archetypal symbols. Since the necessary historical knowledge is lacking to the physician observing them, she is not in the position to perceive the parallelism between her observations and the findings of anthropology and the human sciences in general. Conversely, an expert in mythology and comparative religion is, as a rule, no psychiatrist, and consequently does not know that her mythologians are still fresh and living, for instance in dreams and visions, in the hidden recess of our most personal life, which we would on no account deliver up to scientific dissection. The archetypal material is therefore the great unknown, and it requires special study and preparation even to collect such material. It does not seem to me superfluous to give a number of examples from my case histories which bring out the occurrence of archetypal images in dreams and fantasies. Time and again with my public I come across the difficulty that they imagine illustrated by a few examples to be the simplest thing in the world. In actual fact, it is almost impossible, with a few words and one or two images torn out of their context, to demonstrate anything. This only works when dealing with an expert. What Perseus has to do with the Gorgon's head would never occur to anyone who did not know the myth. So it is with the individual images. They need a context, and the context is not only a myth, but an individual amnesis. Such contexts, however, are of enormous extent. Anything like a complete series of images would require for its proper presentation a book of about 200 pages. My own investigation of the Miller Fantasies gives us some ideas of this. Footnote. See Symbols of Transformation in Baron's book The Mythology of the Soul, which runs to 939 pages and endeavors to do justice to the material provided by only 2 cases. It is therefore with the greatest hesitation that I make the attempt to illustrate from case histories. This material I shall use comes partially from normal and partly from slightly neurotic persons. It is part dream, part vision, or dream mixed with vision. These visions are far from being hallucinations or aesthetic states. They are spontaneous visual images of fantasy, or so-called active imagination. The latter is a method devised by myself of introspection for observing the stream of interior images. One concentrates one's attention on some impressive but unintelligible dream image, or on a spontaneous visual impression, and observes the changes that take place in it. Meanwhile, of course, all criticism must be suspended, and the happenings observed and noted with absolute objectivity. Obviously, too, the objection that the whole thing is arbitrary or thought up must be set aside, since it springs from the anxiety of the ego-consciousness, which brooks no master besides itself in its own house. In other words, it is the inhibition exerted by the conscious mind on to the unconscious. Under these conditions, long and often dramatic series of fantasies ensue. The advantage of this method is that it brings a mass of unconscious material to light. Drawing, painting, and modeling can be used to the same end. Once a visual series has become dramatic, it can easily pass over to the auditive or linguistic sphere and give rise to dialogues and the like. With slightly pathological individuals, and particularly in the not infrequent cases of latent schizophrenia, the method may, in certain circumstances, prove to be rather dangerous and therefore requires medical control. It is based on a deliberate weakening of the conscious mind and its inhibiting effect, which either limits or suppresses the unconscious. The aim of the method is naturally therapeutic in the first place, while in the second also furnishes rich empirical material. Some of our examples are taken from this. They differ from dreams only by reason of their better form, which comes from the fact that the contents were perceived not by dreaming but by waking consciousness. The examples are from women in middle life. 1. Case X. Spontaneous visual impressions in chronological order. 1. I saw a white bird with outstretched wings. It alighted on the figure of a woman clad in blue who sat there like an antique statue. The bird perched on her hand, and in it she held a grain of wheat. The bird took in its beak and flew in the sky again. Antique statue, grain of wheat. For this X painted a picture, a blue-clad, archaically simple mother figure on a white marble base. Her maternity is emphasized by large breasts. 2. A bull lifts a child up from the ground and carries it to an antique statue of a woman. A naked young girl with a wreath of flowers in her hair appears, riding on a white bull. She takes the child and throws it into the air like a ball and catches it again. The white bull carries them both to a temple. The girl lays the child on the ground, and so on. Initiation follows. In this picture, the maiden appears rather in the form of Europa. Here, a certain school knowledge is being made use of. Her nakedness and the wreath of flowers point to Dionysian abandonment. The game of ball with the child is the motif of some secret rite, which always has to do with child sacrifice. The accusations of ritual murder leveled by the pagans against the Christians and by the Christians against the Jews and the Gnostics, and also the Phoenician child sacrifices, rumors about the Black Mass, etc., and the ball game in church. 3. I saw a golden pig on a pedestal. Beast-like beings danced around it in a circle. We made haste to dig a hole in the ground. I reached in and found water. Then a man appeared in a golden carriage. He jumped into the hole and began swaying back and forth as if dancing. I swayed in rhythm with him. Then he suddenly leapt out of the hole, raped me, and got me with child. Dancing, digging a hole in the ground, water. X is identical with a young girl who often appeared as a youth, too. This youth is an animus figure, an embodiment of the masculine element in a woman. Youth and young girl together form a Sazargi or connuccio, which symbolizes the essence of wholeness, as does the Platonic hermaphrodite, who later became the symbol of perfected wholeness in alchemical philosophy. X evidently dances with the rest, hence we made haste. The parallel with the motifs stressed by Kerényi seemed to me remarkable. 4. I saw a beautiful youth with golden cymbals dancing and leaping in joy and abandonment. Finally he fell to the ground and buried his face in the flowers. Then he sank into the lap of a very old mother. After a time he got up and jumped into the water, where he sported like a dolphin. I saw his hair was golden. Now we were leaping together hand in hand. We came to a gorge. In leaping in the gorge, the youth falls into the chasm. X is left alone and comes to a river, where a white seahorse is waiting for her with a golden boat. Mother, dolphin, seahorse. In this scene, X is the youth. Therefore, he disappears later, leaving her the sole heroine of the story. She is the child of the very old mother, and is also the dolphin, the youth lost in the gorge, and the bride evidently expected by Poseidon. The particular overlapping and displacement of motifs in all this individual material is about the same as in the mythological variants. X found the youth in the lap of the mother so impressive that she painted a picture of it. The figure is the same as in the item 1, only instead of the grain of wheat in her hand, there is the body of the youth lying completely exhausted in the lap of the gigantic mother. 5. There now follows a sacrifice of sheep, during which a game of ball is likewise played with the sacrificial animal. The participants smear themselves with sacrificial blood, and afterwards bathe in the pulsating gore. X is thereupon transformed into a plant. Blood, plant. 6. After X comes into a den of snakes, and the snakes wind all around here. Snakes. 7. In a den of snakes beneath the sea there is a divine woman asleep. She is shown in the picture as much larger than the others. She is wearing a blood-red garment which covers only the lower half of her body. She has a dark snake. She has dark skin, full red lips, and seems to be of great physical strength. She kisses X, who is obviously in the role of the young girl, and hands her as a present to the many men who are standing by, etc. This chthonic goddess is the typical Earth Mother as she appears in so many modern fantasies. A woman shown in the picture much larger than the others. 8. As X emerges from the depths and saw the light... 8. As X emerges from the depths and saw the light again, she experienced a kind of illumination. White flames played above her head as she walked through waving fields of grain. With this picture, the mother episode ended. Although there is not the slightest trace of any known myth being repeated, the motifs and the connections between them are all familiar to us from mythology. These images present themselves spontaneously and are based on no conscious knowledge whatsoever. I have applied the method of active imagination to myself over a long time, and have observed numerous symbols and symbolic associations, which, in many cases, I was able only to verify years afterwards in texts of those existences I was totally ignorant. It is the same with dreams. Some years ago I dreamed, for example, that I was climbing slowly and toilsomely up a mountain. When I reached, as I imagined, the top, I found I was standing on the edge of a plateau. The crest that represented the real top of the mountain not only rose off far in the distance, night was coming on, and I saw on the dark slope opposite a brook flowing down with a metallic shimmer, and two paths leading upwards, one to the left and the other to the right, winding like serpents. On the crest to the right there was a hotel. Down below, a brook ran to the left with a bridge leading across. Not long afterwards I discovered the following allegory in an obscure alchemical treatise. In his Speculative Philosophiae, the Frankfurt physician Gerard Dorn, who lived in the second half of the 16th century, described the mundi peregrinatio quam erroris viam appellamus tour of the world, which we call the way of errors, on the one hand the via veritas, and on the other the via veritas. Of the first way, the author says, the human race, whose nature it is to resist God, does not cease to ask how it may, by its own efforts, escape the pitfalls which it has laid for itself. But it does not ask help from him on whom alone depends every gift of mercy. Hence it comes about that men have built for themselves a great workshop of the left-handed side of the road, presiding over industry. After this there has been attained, they turn aside from industry and bend their steps towards the second region of the world, making their crossing on the bridge of infirmity. But because the good God desires to draw them back, he allows their infirmities to rule over them. Then, seeking as before a remedy in themselves, industry, they flock to the great hospital, likewise built on the left, presiding over by medicine. Here there is a great multitude of apothecaries, surgeons, and physicians. Of the way of truth, which is the right way, our author says, "You will come to the camp of wisdom, and on being received there, you will be refreshed with food far more powerful than before. Even the brook is there, a stream of living water, flown with such wonderful artifice from the mountain peak, from the fountain of wisdom, and the waters gush forth." An important difference, compared with my dreams, is that here, apart from the situation of the hotel being reversed, the river of wisdom is on the right side and not, as in my dreams, in the middle of the picture. It is evident in my dream that we are not dealing with any known myth, but with a group of ideas which might easily have been regarded as individual, i.e. unique. A thorough analysis, however, could show that without difficulty that it is an archetypal image, such as can be reproduced over and over again in any age and at any place. But I must admit that the archetypal nature of the dream image only became clear to me when I read Dorn. These and similar incidents I have observed repeatedly, not only in myself but in my patients. But, as this example shows, it needs special attention if such parallels are not to be missed. The antique mother image is not exhausted with the figure of Demeter. It also expresses itself in Sibyl Artemis. The next case points in this direction. 2. Case Y. Dreams. 1. I am wandering over great mountains. The way is lonely, wild, and difficult. A woman comes down from the sky to accompany and help me. She is all bright with light hair and shining eyes. Now and then she vanishes. After going on for some time, alone, I notice I have left my stick somewhere and must turn back to fetch it. To do this, I have to pass a terrible monster, an enormous bear. When I came this way the first time I had passed it, but then the Sky Woman protected me. Just as I am passing the beast and he is about to come at me, she stands beside me again, and at her look the bear vanishes down quietly and lets us pass. The bear lies down quietly and lets us pass. Then the Sky Woman vanishes. Here we have a maternally protective goddess related to bears, a kind of Diana or the Gallo-Roman dea Arterio. The Sky Woman is the positive, the bear the negative aspect of the superordinate personality, which extends the conscious human being upwards into the celestial and downwards into the animal region. 2. We go through a door with a tower-like room, where we climb a long flight of steps. On one of the topmost steps I read an inscription, lives.The. The step ends in a temple situated on the crest of a wooden mountain, and there is no other approach. It is the shrine of Usana, the bear goddess and mother god in one. The mother of God in one. The temple is of red stone. Bloody sacrifices are offered there. Animals are standing about the altar. In order to enter the temple precincts, one has to be transformed into an animal, a beast of the forest. The temple has the form of a cross with equal arms and a circular space in the middle, which is not roofed, so that one can look straight up at the sky and the constellation of the bear. On the altar in the middle of the open space there stands the moon bowl, from which smoke or vapor continually rises. There is also a huge image of the goddess, but it cannot be seen clearly. The worshippers, who have changed into animals and to whom I also belong, have to touch the goddess's foot with their own foot, whereupon the image gives them a sign or an oracular utterance like vis ut sis. In this dream, the bear goddess emerges plainly, although her statue cannot be seen clearly. The relationship to the self, the superordinate personality, is indicated not only by the oracle vis ut sis, but by the quaternity and the circular central precept of the temple. From ancient times, any relationship to the stars has always symbolized eternity. The soul comes from the stars and returns to the stellar region. Ursana's relationship to the moon is indicated by the moon bow. The moon goddess also appears in children's dreams. A child who grew up in particularly difficult psychic circumstances, had a recurring dream between her 7th and 10 years. The Moon Lady was always waiting for me down by the water at the landing edge to take me to her island. Unfortunately, she could never remember what happened there, but it was so beautiful that she often prayed that she might have this dream again. Although, as is evident, the two dreamers are not identical, the island motif also occurred in a previous dream as an inaccessible mountain crest. 30 years later, the dreamer of the Moon Lady had a dramatic fantasy. I am climbing a steep, dark mountain on top of which stands a domed castle. I enter and go up a winding stairway to the left. Arriving inside the dome, I find myself in the presence of a woman wearing a headdress of cow's horns. I recognize her immediately as the Moon Lady of my childhood dreams. At her behest, I look up to the right and see a dazzling, bright sun shining on the other side of a deep chasm. Over the chasm stretches a narrow, transparent bridge, upon which I step, conscious of the fact that in no circumstances must I look down. An uncanny fear seizes me, and I hesitate. Treachery seems to be in the air, but at last I go across and stand before the sun. The sun speaks. If you can approach me 9 times without being burned, all will be well. But I grow more and more afraid. Finally, I do look down, and I see a black tentacle like that of an octopus groping towards me from underneath the sun. I step back in fright and plunge into the abyss. Instead of being dashed to pieces, I lie in the arms of Earth Mother. When I try to look into her face, she turns to clay, and I find myself lying on earth. It is remarkable how the beginnings of this fantasy agrees with the dream. The Moon Lady above is clearly distinguished from the Earth Mother below. The former urges the dreamer to her somewhat perilous adventure with the sun. The latter catches her protectively in her maternal arms. The dreamer, as the one in danger, would therefore seem to be in the role of the Quarry. Let us turn now back to our dream series. 3. Why sees 2 pictures in a dream, painted by the Scandinavian painter Herman Christian Lund. 1. The first picture is of a Scandinavian pheasant room. The peasant girls in gay costumes are walking about arm in arm, that is, in a row. The middle one is smaller than the rest, and, besides this, has a hump and turning her head back, and keeps turning her head back. This, together with her peculiar glance, gives her a witch-like look. 2. The second picture shows a dragon with its neck stretched out over the whole picture, and especially over a girl, who is in the dragon's power and cannot move, for as soon as she moves, the dragon, which can make its body big or little at will, moves too, and when the girl wants to get away, it simply stretches out its neck over her, and so catches her again. Strangely enough, the girl has no face, or at least I couldn't see it. The painter is an invention of the dream. The animus often appears as a painter and has some kind of projection apparatus, or as a cinema operator or owner of a picture gallery. All this refers to the animus as the function mediating between conscious and unconscious. The unconscious contents pictures which are transmitted, that is, made manifest by the animus, either as fantasies or unconsciously in the patient's own life and actions. The animus projection gives rise to fantasied relations of love and hatred for heroes and demons. The favorite victims are tenors, artists, movie stars, athletic champions, etc. In the first picture, the maiden is characterized as demonic, with a hump and an evil look over her shoulder. Hence, amulets against an evil eye are often worn by privatives on the nape of the neck for the vulnerable spot, as at the back, where you can't see. In the second picture, the maiden is portrayed as the innocent victim of the monster. Just as before there was a relationship of identity between the sky woman and the bear, so here between the girl and the dragon, which in practical life is often rather more than just a bad joke. Here it signifies a widening of the conscious personality, i.e., through the helplessness of the victim on the one hand, and the dangers of the humpback's evil eye and the dragon's might on the other. 4. Part dream, part visual imagination. A magician is demonstrating his tricks to an Indian prince. He produces a beautiful young girl from under a cloth. She is a dancer who has the power to change her shape or at least hold her audience spellbound by faultless illusion. During the dance she dissolves with the music into a swarm of bees. Then she changes into a leopard, then the jet of water, and then into an octopus that has twined itself about a young pearl fisher. Between times she takes human form again at the dramatic moment. She appears as a she-ass bearing 2 baskets of wonderful fruit. Then she becomes a many-colored peacock. The prince is beside himself with delight and calls her to him. But she dances on, now naked, and even tears the skin from her body and finally falls down, a naked skeleton. This is buried, and at night a lily grows out of the grave, and from its cup there rises a white lady, who floats slowly up to the sky. White lady. This piece describes the successive transformations of the illusionist, artistry in illusion being a specifically feminine talent, until she becomes a transfigured personality. The fancy was not invented as a sort of allegory. It was part dream, part spontaneous imagery. 5. I am in a dark church made of grey sandstone. The apse is built rather high. Near the tabernacle, a girl in a red dress is hanging on the stone cross of the window. Suicide? Just as in the preceding case the sacrifice of a child or a sheep played a part, so here the sacrifice of the maiden hanging on the cross. The death of the dancer is also to be understood in this sense, for these maidens are always doomed to die, because their exclusive dominion of the feminine psyche hinders the individuation process, that is, the maturation of personality. The maiden corresponds to the anima of the man and makes use of it to gain her natural ends, in which illusion plays the greatest role imaginable. But as long as a woman is content to be a femme à homme, she has no feminine individuality. She is empty and merely glitters, a welcome vessel for masculine projections. Woman as a personality, however, is a very different thing. Here illusion no longer works, so that when the question of personality rises, which is, as a rule, the painful fact of the second half of life, the childish form of the self disappears too. All that remains for me now is to describe the Quarry as observable in man, the anima, since a man's wholeness, in so far as he is not constituently homosexual, can only be masculine personality. The female figure of the anima cannot be catalogued as a type of superordinate personality, but requires a different evaluation and position. In the products of unconscious activity, the anima appears equally as maiden and mother, which is why a personalistic interpretation always reduces her to the personal mother or some other female person. The real meaning of the figure naturally gets lost in the process, as is inevitably the case with all these reductive interpretations, whether in the sphere of the psychology of the unconscious or mythology. The innumerable attempts that have been made in the sphere of mythology to interpret gods and heroes in a solar, lunar, astral, or meteorological sense contribute nothing of importance to the understanding of them. On the contrary, they put us all on a false track. When, therefore, in dreams and other spontaneous products we meet with an unknown female figure whose significance oscillates between the extremes of goddess and horror, it is advisable to let her keep her independence and not reduce her arbitrarily to something known. If the unconscious shows her as unknown, this attribute should not be got rid of by main force with a view to arriving at a rational interpretation. Like the supraordinate personality, the anima is bipolar, and can therefore appear positive one moment and negative the next, now young, now old, now mother, now maiden, now good fairy, now witch, now a saint, now whore. Besides this ambivalence, the anima has an occult connections with the mysteries, with the world of darkness in general, and for that reason she often has a religious tinge. Whenever she emerges with some degree of clarity, she always has a peculiar relationship on time. As a rule, she is more or less immortal, because outside time. Writers who have tried their hand at this figure never failed to stress the anima's peculiarity in this respect. I would refer to the classic description in Rider Haggard's She and the Return of She, and in Pierre Bientot's L'Atlantitude, and above all the novel of the young American author William M. Sloane, To Walk the Night. In all these accounts the anima is outside time as we know it, and consequently immensely old, or a being who belongs in a different order of things. Since we can no longer or only partially express the archetypes of the unconscious by any means of figures in which we religiously believe, they lapse into unconsciousness again, and hence are unconsciously projected onto more or less suitable human personalities. To the young boy a clearly discernible anima form appears in his mother, and this lends her the radiance of power and superiority, or else of daimonic aura of even greater fascination. But because of the anima's ambivalence, the projection can be entirely negative. Much of the fear which the feminine sex arouses in men is due to the projection of the anima image. An infantile man generally has a maternal anima, an adult man the figure of a younger woman. The senile man finds compensation in a very young girl, or even a child. 3. Case Z. The anima also has affinities with animals which symbolize her characteristics. Thus she can appear as a snake or a tiger or a bird. I quote by way of example a dream series that contains transformations of this kind. 1. A white bird perches on a table. Suddenly it changes into a fair-haired 7-year-old girl, and just as suddenly back into a bird, which now speaks with a human voice. 2. In an underground house, which is really the underworld, there lives an old magician and a prophet with his daughter. She is, however, not really his daughter. She is a dancer, a very loose person, but is blind and seeks healing. 3. A lonely house in a wood, where an old scholar is living. Suddenly his daughter appears, a kind of ghost, complaining that people only look at her as a figment of fantasy. 4. On the facade of a church there is a Gothic Madonna, who is alive and is the unknown and yet known woman. Instead of a child, she holds in her arms a sort of flame, or snake, or a dragon. 5. A black-clad countess kneels in a dark chapel. Her dress is hung with costly pearls. She has red hair, and there is something uncanny about her. Moreover, she is surrounded by the spirits of the dead. 6. A female snake comports herself tenderly and insinuatingly, speaking with a human voice. She is only accidentally shaped like a snake. 7. A bird speaks with the same voice, but shows herself helpful by trying to rescue the dreamer from a dangerous situation. 8. The unknown woman sits, like the dreamer, on the tip of a church spire and stares at him uncannily across the abyss. 9. The unknown woman suddenly appears as an old female attendant in an underground public lavatory with a temperature of 40 degrees below zero. 10. The unknown woman leaves the house as a petit bourgeois with a female relation, and in her place there is suddenly an over-life-sized goddess clad in blue, looking like Athena. 11. Then she appears in a church, taking the place of the altar, still over the life-size, but with a veiled face. In all these dreams, the central figure is a mysterious feminine being with qualities like those of no woman known to the dreamer. The unknown is described as such in the dreams themselves and reveals her extraordinary nature firstly by her power to change shape and secondly by her paradoxical ambivalence. Every conceivable shade of meaning glitters in her from the highest to the lowest. Dream 1 shows the anima as elf-like, i.e. only partially human. She can just as well be a bird, which means that she may belong wholly to nature and can vanish, i.e. become unconscious, from the human sphere, i.e. consciousness. Dream 2 shows the unknown woman as a mythological figure from the beyond, the unconscious. She is a soror or filia mystica of a hierophant or philosopher, evidently a parallel to those mystic synergies which are to be met with the figure of Simon Magus and Helen Zosimus and Thesboitia, Comarius and Cleopatra, etc. Our dream figure fits it best with Helen. A really admirable description of anima psychology in a woman is to be found in Etruscan's Helen of Troy. Dream 3 presents the same theme, but a more fairy-like plane. Here the anima is shown as rather spookish. Dream 4 brings the anima nearer to the Mother of God. The child refers to the mystic speculations on the subject of the redemptive serpent and the fiery nature of the Redeemer. In Dream 5, the anima is visualized somewhat more romantically, and as the distinguished, fascinating woman who nevertheless has dealings with spirits. Dreams 6 and 7 being theriomorphic variations, the anima's identity is at once apparent to the dreamer because of the voice that it takes. The anima has accidentally taken the form of a snake, just as in Dream 1 she changed with the greatest ease into a bird and back again. As a snake, she is playing the negative role, as a bird the positive. Dream 8 shows the dreamer confronted with his anima. This takes place high above the ground, i.e. above human reality. Obviously, it is a case of dangerous fascination by the anima. Dream 9 signifies the anima's deep plunge into an extremely subordinate position, where the last trace of fascination has gone and only human sympathy is left. Dream 10 Dream 10 shows the paradoxical double nature of the anima, banal mediocrity and Olympian divinity. Dream 11 restores the anima to the Christian church, not as an icon, but as the altar itself. The altar is a place of sacrifice, and also the receptacle for consecrated relics. To throw even a modern light on all these anima associations would require very special and extensive investigation, which would not be out of place here because, as we have already seen, the anima has only an indirect bearing on the interpretation of the Quarry figure. I have presented this dream series simply for the purpose of giving the reader some idea of the empirical material on which the idea of the anima is based. From this series, and others like it, we get an average picture of that strange factor which has such an important part to play in the masculine psyche, and which naive presumption invariably identifies with certain women, imputing to them all the illusions that swarm in the male eros. It seems clear enough that the man's anima found occasion for projection in the Demeter cult. The Quarry doomed to her subterranean fate, the two-faced mother, the theoremorphic aspects of both, afforded the anima ample opportunities to reflect herself, shimmering and unequivocal in the Eleusinian cult, or rather to experience herself here and there, and fill the celebrants with her unearthly essence to their lasting gain. For a man, anima experiences are always of immense and abiding significance. But the Demeter-Quarry myth is far too feminine to have been merely the result of an anima projection. Although the anima can, as we have said, experience herself in Demeter-Quarry, she is yet of a wholly different nature. She is, in the highest degree, a femme à homme, whereas Demeter-Quarry exists on the plane of mother-daughter experience, which is alien to man and shuts him out. In fact, the psychology of the Demeter cult bears all the features of a maternal order of society, where the man is an indispensable but wholly disturbing factor.